Welcome, everyone, to In the Driver's Seat, the podcast that's all about exploring how to improve the value of your business. We're here to help business owners positioning themselves ultimately for a successful exit. My name is Simon Zryd, and together with Steven Kohnke, here we're co-hosting this podcast. We're partners at Denver Business Coach. We're both certified exit planning advisors, certified value builders, and we've worked with business owners in the field of value building and exit planning for close to a decade now. Our podcast aims to make the discussion of building a valuable, sellable business more accessible to business owners, and not just accessible, but accessible early on in the conversation. When we launched into 2024, we were looking at some of the statistics, and I'll let Steven introduce them. And that was really the catalyst for us starting this podcast. And so, Steven, I'll turn it over to you. What is the reality for most small business owner when it comes to exiting their business?
It's not great, right? The numbers we get back are 3 out of 4 businesses that actually go to sell, take their business to the open market. They do not sell, 75%, just about. Those numbers don't include the ones that decide to shut down, which is pretty common. And it also doesn't factor in the actual number of which businesses that are sold for. So that additional 25% didn't ask the question of, was that enough to sell? It was just the event of selling to a third party. So not a great statistic for being able to prepare and cash in what you've built over 20, 30 plus years. And then that coupled with 70 to 90% of a business owner's wealth, overall wealth, is tied up in that business, in that assets that they've been building over that period of time as well. So the ability to or the likelihood that their business will not sell, and that most of their wealth is in that business. We're trying to introduce what makes a company sellable to change those stats, and that's the mission that we're on.
Yeah, I think we've talked about it in the past as well, the reality of, I think one other statistic, of the ones that sell, 70% regret the sale of their business as well. And then we've talked a lot about, what it means to actually run a successful business, getting it off the ground, and in terms of compensation or lack thereof, in terms of time invested, additional headaches, and all of that. And so today we want to explore a little bit this topic of, like, why do business owners start businesses, right? What is behind that? And we work with lots of business owners at Denver Business Coach, and I could easily say that I would say north of 90% of the business owners that we work with, if they were to just get a job at a company, they would do just fine. They would make a good 6-figure income. They would have paid vacation, paid holidays, good benefits package. They're actually really successful, smart people. And then they take on the burden of starting a business, and it comes with a lot of, like we talked about, time investment, money investment, time away from family, all of that.
A lot more risk.
Yeah, a lot of and risk, exactly. So let's talk a little bit about what motivates a business owner to start a business in the first place. What have you seen are like the primary drivers to embark on that journey?
Well, survey that we were talking about asked business owners how do they define someone who is wealthy, right? And the 3 options that were given were, someone with $10 million in investable assets, someone that has enough money to cover their lifestyle expenses, and someone with the ability to do whatever they want, whenever they want. And the majority of those business owners selected that last option of doing whatever they want, whenever they want. 47% from this survey that we were looking at responded that way. And I think what that turns into is freedom, right? To do whatever you want, whenever you want, that's freedom, right? So being able to say, I'm going to start a business because I want more autonomy in my life. I want more freedom to do what I want in my life. I want freedom to do travel when I want to, or be spontaneous in that way, or whatever. So I think that's the pursuit a lot of business owners do look for, is not necessarily I want 10 million in investable assets. I want to be a millionaire. Like that's not the driving force for the majority of them. It's can I just do I want to do what I want to do.
Yeah, because that number is totally arbitrary, right? Like it was 10 million in there, but it could be 15 million or 20 million or but I think the difference there is it's a number where someone else would say, you've made it, you know, you've accomplished something, you're rich, you're successful, whatever. And it's like an outside um metric almost that would define success versus what you're describing, what we're seeing for business owners. It's like that internal, or it's more like that freedom that they're looking for, that's not defined by anyone else's interpretation of what that looks like, per se.
Mhm. Yeah, the freedom to, I think that's a really good point you bring up. It's not someone else's definition of what being wealthy is, being rich is. It's their own internal definition of why does this matter, right? Of what can you spend your time in? What can you spend your money in for the money that you do make? Is that going to provide you with a life that you enjoy? I think that's where a lot of those
Yeah,
freedom
yeah.
conversations.
And we see that a lot with, you know, the entrepreneurial freedoms, freedom of time, freedom of money, freedom of impact and relationships, all that. You've mentioned all of that. So now diving a little deeper into today's conversation, it's interesting because if we say on the one hand how most entrepreneurs define success is freedom,
Mhm.
right? So we're seeing that through different metrics and surveys. But then when we talk to business owners often and say, okay, what are your goals? What are you working on? Like what's next in your business? What do you see most of the answers that you're getting to that question?
Yeah, it depends on how long we've been working with them, I say, but
Let's say a
but
new
yeah,
client.
yeah, new guys. A lot of them are very driven by that revenue metric, that top line number of sales. That's like um, that is their driver of what growth and success looks like. I want $1 million company, 5 million, 10 million, $20 million company, and all the way up, and the number always gets bigger and bigger and bigger. Um, but well, I think we're going into this of being able to say what other metrics should they be looking at in that way.
Yeah, because I do think one of the things that happens is if you're not focused on other things that obviously we're leading towards building value, right? If you're not focusing on those things, just driving revenue potentially and most often is actually uh directly impacting the freedom that you're looking to have, right? Because if you
Right.
don't have a valuable business, more revenue, more volume through your business usually means you have to do more sales, you have to do more delivery, you have to manage more like it comes actually with a lot of what you're not looking for if you're not careful and focusing on
Yeah,
those things first, right?
that's a good point. A lot of driving revenue can mean more work and less time freedom, specifically of working in the business more often. So yeah.
So going back to how clients answer that question, what's next for you? If it's not top line revenue that they're focusing on, then what would be a metric um, that would make more sense for an owner to look at?
But the difference between um, what we're going to talk about, the owner's metric versus the manager's metric, and I think really drawing a distinction between those two words is, manager is going to be looking at, call it sales manager, going to be looking at close rates or leads generated, or and especially sales made, so that again back to the top line number. And all those are great to be paying attention to. It's not that business owners shouldn't be, but the owner's metric that they should pay most attention to is how are those things going to impact the multiple that they are assigned for the business. The multiple is what can drive the company of actual value, and will really determine how I think we talk about it is the health of the company.
Mhm.
You have low multiple, not that healthy of a company. It's a high risk company. It's you're probably doing a lot of this stuff. If it's a high multiple, just the opposite.
Yeah, I think our dream would be that all the entrepreneurs that we bring together in a room would be talking in terms of like, what multiple are you operating at right now,
Right. Yeah.
rather than just top line revenue. Um, so, and we've like over the course of this podcast, obviously we've driven, or we've like focused in on like some of the different drivers of what drives the multiple. I think when if we're now zooming back on, if the multiple is the metric that an owner should pay attention to, right? um how does one keep it front and center? Like, with financials, you get your P&L, you get your balance sheet, you kind of get a pretty good sense of where you're operating in terms of EBITDA and that side of the equation. Multiple is a little bit more tangible because there's lots of things that impact it as well. So how would you say an owner can keep track of it? What is the right cadence, and how do I keep that as a KPI front and center?
Keep it in front. It's I'm trying not to say work with us because that's our main metric that we look at. But I think aside from that, it's tough. It's tough for the normal owner to be looking at a metric as what is your multiple? Because I think and I run across clients and other owners that do this. It's a Google search of what multiples does my industry have, and then they'll think they're middle of the road and say, okay, if it's
3.5.
yeah, I probably have a 3.5 multiple, and
Yeah.
and then they go on their way in that way, and it's a little more complicated than that, but um being able to do some sort of health checkup of intangibles of the company. So even if we're looking at uh going by feeling too, of how valuable could my business be if you're not engaging with an expert that does have access to these metrics. So I will say that there's lots of databases that can provide you this information, um but being able to say, how much of the day to day am I doing as the owner? Kind of those litmus tests, I guess. How transferable or how trainable is the word I use is service delivery. How and if the answers are, I could train anyone to do what we're doing pretty easily, that's going to increase your value. If it's, I'm not really in the day to day, I'm not very customer facing, that's going to impact the valuation and that multiple number. So if you don't have access to those assessments or databases, kind of those litmus test components are where are the risks of my business? How dependent is it on me? Those sorts of questions to be asking, I think, is a really good starting point for most owners
Mhm.
to understand where they might fall in, their Google search of what is the valuation of my industry.
Yeah. I mean, I do think, people or business owners that have not engaged in this conversation of value building, or really looking at an exit in with more um, seriousness, I would say, like, it's a real thing that they're just setting goals based on sales revenue, right? Versus if you do have the multiple, if you understand that, all of a sudden when you make your strategic plan, when you're planning for your new year, you're looking at areas of owner dependency, customer concentration, key employees, cash flow, recurring revenue, like all those things that actually then impact the multiple. You have way more places to look and say, how are we stacking up in those areas? And so therefore, what should be our value building strategic plan versus just top line revenue?
If we're
go for
focusing on those risk areas too, those people areas, especially, that in turn does have an impact on top line revenue as
that.
well.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those, if you focus on, I was actually explaining this the other day, not to get too far off topic, but when the types of businesses and the types of buyers that we at Denver Business Coach build our clients to essentially be acquired by, and how we're looking at the growth of their businesses, is the financial buyer. So the independency of the business from the owner, how much they're going to work in, so how much return comes down to how much return are they going to get on the money that they spend by buying this business without working in it. So we are building our business, our clients, for the financial buyer. That doesn't exclude a strategic buyer coming in and buying the company in a strategic acquisition. But if we only build a business for a strategic acquisition, we eliminate the financial buyer in most cases.
Yeah. Yeah.
The strategic buyer will come in for IP or something very specific and won't necessarily care about all the other things that you build, depending on other factors. But so if we only focus on strategic, we cut out a lot of the stuff.
Yeah. I'd like
So
to. Oh, go
it,
ahead.
so just to kind of round out the thought, if we're only focusing on growing revenue, it's a very small piece of the equation. Then if we're focusing on value and all the components that make up value, that does impact the multiple number that we pay attention to, and it will also impact the revenue number growth.
Yeah. And I think, and then to take this and tie it all the way back to, where we started out in terms of why did people start their company? Freedom, because you don't know about the timing of an exit per se. Oftentimes it is a question mark, and you never want to be in a position where you're forced to sell because of any circumstance, mostly external circumstances. But we've talked about this a lot before. The things that make your business more valuable are also the items that, once they're in place, give you more freedom that you're looking for in the first place. And I do think that is important to remember, because yes, there are the entrepreneurs that want to drive and build to sell and have a timeline with that. But then there's a lot of people that also speak to us in the first place. They want to sell because they want to get out, because they're exhausted, because they're it's not as profitable as they thought, whatever the reasons are. But I do think of the four freedoms. If you have freedom of money and freedom of time, those are really key factors. Then you can choose who you want to work with, right, as well, and really where you want to direct your impact as well. So I think really understanding that your business has the potential to provide you those freedoms versus taking time away, I think is really important. And by focusing on the multiple versus just growing top line revenue, you're going to get there faster and more intentionally, I think is kind of our key message here that we want to drive home.
You build the asset by focusing on the multiple and not the revenue.
Yeah. And there's a reality we don't want to completely ignore. There are multiple jumps, right, in terms of where your multiple jumps significantly if you reach certain top line revenue or EBITDA numbers as well. So obviously focusing on growth of the company, it is one aspect of it as well, but it's not the only one, I think. Yeah. All right. I think that's it. So if we had to summarize it in one sentence, what's our key message to business owners that are started and running their company for the freedom that they're looking for?
Understand what makes a company valuable and focus on growing that.
All right.
Multiple.
Awesome. Thank you, Steven, for a great conversation here. Again, thank you to our listeners. Hope you got some valuable takeaways from this conversation. Again, Steven Kohnke, Simon Zryd with in the driver's seat, and looking forward to talking to you guys next week. Thank you.
Thanks, Simon.